Hello, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Recognize and Manage Your Level of Crazy with EQ. And today we have an amazing episode for you that we're going to be talking about something that's really, really fascinating. And we have two wonderful guests with us tonight. One of them, and the other one is a brand new guest, a new friend that we met recently. And we're gonna introduce them in just a minute, but let me share with you what we're going to be talking about today. Today we're going to be talking about the Stoics and the Stoic philosophy, and one of the most famous Stoics of all time, which is Marcus Aurelius. And we're so excited about this topic. And so without further ado, let's get into it and let's introduce our guest for tonight. So, as you know, I am Ala Esther Levy, emotional intelligence specialist and minister of spiritual healing, founder of the EIEQ Institute, a platform dedicated to the awareness, practice, and education of emotional intelligence. And so happy to have you here tonight. And Tom, we are so excited that you're here. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Tom, and you'll see me on with Esther on a regular basis, and I'm glad to be here, Esther. I'm looking forward to this topic. I'm glad to be here with our friend Brett, and so glad to be here.
Awesome. And Brett, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited. We met a couple of weeks back, and we were talking about, also a lot of different philosophers, and that's how we met at a meetup group. And so excited to have you tonight. Why don't you tell us what you do on a daily when you're not talking about the Stoics?
Yeah, I'm an adjunct professor at Nova Southeastern University. I teach psychology there. In my spare time, when I'm not talking specifically about Stoicism or any other philosophers, I just like reading different books that interest me and allow me to, I guess, stimulate my curiosity in some way, and spend time with friends and family as well.
Nice, nice. Okay, great. Tom, remind us what you do again.
Well, I'm an acupuncturist and occupational therapist. Esther and I work together in a practice called Florida Balance Centers, where we specialize in inner ear disorders, vertigo, dizziness, and balance problems. And with acupuncture, we serve a variety of conditions, pain management, and wellness. So we include nutritional support, emotional intelligence work, and all around servicing clients to help them achieve a higher optimal well-being.
Nice. And that is actually something I wanted to mention, that this video and these videos are sponsored by Florida Balance Centers, which allows us to do the work that we do. So thank you so much, Tom, for doing this for the past 30 plus years and giving us now the ability to get this work of emotional intelligence out there. And thank you for being my partner and most supportive ally.
Thank you. That's great. You're awesome, Es. You really work hard at this. I see her every day working on her book edits and setting up, events to do. So you're a hard worker, and you're very appreciated as well. So thank you.
Thank you. That sounded so formal.
I know. We'll get a little more relaxed in a moment as we get moving.
Right. All right. Yes. Awesome. So guys, I'm so happy that we're here doing this. It's going to be a really great conversation. So let's begin by first understanding, what is this philosophy of Stoicism? Did I do it right?
I would think Stoicism.
Stoicism.
I think, yeah, we'll get that pronunciation. A little tough one, I know, a little unusual, yes, but you're getting closer.
Okay, Stoicism. So it is the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint. And the 4 rules of Stoicism is: a Stoic believes they don't control the world around them, they only respond. And they must always respond with courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the greatest Stoics of all time is Marcus Aurelius, the most famous ancient Stoic who was an emperor of Rome, and the height of his power wrote many books, but one in particular, which was called Meditations. And it describes basically his habits, things that he believed in, the way that he conducted himself on a daily, and basically just how he dealt with life and how he was able to be an emperor, such a successful emperor of Rome. And so, let's get into it, guys. What do you think about that so far? Like, tell me what you have found based on your, search of this, I would say, amazing individual that is someone that can really be an amazing example for us today. So the floor is open to whoever wants to start.
Brett, I might pass it on to you for a moment, so to give you an opportunity.
Yeah, sure. So thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And so I actually got my introduction to Marcus Aurelius when I was younger by watching the movie The Gladiator. Have you seen that movie?
Yes.
So Marcus Aurelius is that old emperor at the very beginning who is killed by his son in that opening part of Gladiator. I don't know if that's exactly how I don't think that's how he was killed. I think they might have done that for the movie. I had to double check that. But, Marcus Aurelius, I found that that's who this person was. And as time went on and I got a little older, I found his books and I was like, oh, wait, this is that guy, Marcus Aurelius. He was supposed to be this wise emperor in that movie. Let me actually go ahead and delve into his philosophy of it. And I have right here my copy I got years and years ago of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And it's
nice.
It's such a great book because, as you mentioned, Esther, he didn't plan on publishing it, supposedly. That wasn't really his intention. He wasn't like, I'm going to write this book and everyone's going to read it in Rome and they're going to have their lives changed and all these kinds of things. It's really his own personal reflections. And, you can kind of, I guess, maybe compare it in some sense to like, this is his diary writing. This is his journaling. It's his, he was obviously educated in the traditions of philosophers who had come before him. And he's able to take a lot of the wisdom and the insight that he has and apply it to his own life, which is a fascinating thing because we read about many powerful people in history. In some cases, they use their power for good. In some cases, they use their power for evil. Marcus Aurelius is such a fascinating example to me because he was the most powerful man in the world at his time. And that's so much power that lies within your hands. And he used his power not for evil. And I'm sure he was flawed like any other person, but he was able to be that interesting balance between philosopher and emperor, where he actually said, let me incorporate the philosophy that I know and that I myself contribute to the everyday practices I have as an emperor, and allowing that to guide what I do, which is such a relief because there were some pretty bad Roman emperors before Marcus Aurelius who didn't really have that wisdom, like Nero or Caligula, who did terrible things with their power. And so Marcus Aurelius, for me, is such an interesting example because of how he was able to use his information, his knowledge, his wisdom for that position and to leave a positive legacy in the wake of that, to where all these years later, with the book that wasn't supposed to be published, we're sitting here and we're talking about it now because it's inspirational in that way. And it does add value to people's lives in terms of his Stoic view of life and all the things that entails.
Yeah. What you're describing is that, okay, sorry, I heard some noises there. It's interesting what you're saying because actually they mentioned that he had some ailments, some illnesses. And it was hard to understand if he was actually killed by his son, which I remember in the movie, Commodus, I hope I'm saying his name right, was one of the sons. And in the movie, he kills him. But in real life, I'm not sure if it was actually his illness that was his demise. But also, it's fascinating because I did capture some of his challenges in his lifetime, and I'd like to read some of those. So on a personal level, Marcus Aurelius had various health issues, including chronic chest and stomach pain. He struggled to sleep. You got to wonder, huh? I'm running a whole empire. I wonder why he had a hard time sleeping. Maybe he should have tried some melatonin, right, Tom?
Probably a little bit more than that.
Yeah, right. He was considered by many of his enemies to be a frail and sick man. And one of the most significant challenges was that he faced during his there was the war, one of the most important wars of his time. There was a conflict, and he was really struggling to just to stay healthy and just to stay present, during all these times. As also, he had children that had died. So he had multiple children that died. And we know that when a child passes, that's not the nature of life. That's not the cycle of life. So when you lose a child, the devastation of that. And so he dealt with a lot of challenges in his lifetime. And, which brings us to, okay, so how is this philosophy of Stoicism? How was Stoicism, thank you. How was he able to, recognize and manage his level of crazy? Right? How did he do that? And yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, some of the things that impressed me when I started researching him is he said it's one thing to talk about being a good person, but the bottom line, his philosophy was just be a good person. And I think, Brett, what you described, his power and how many people are corrupted by power, he actually did live that philosophy. I think one of his things that I liked that he said he believed that every day is an opportunity to live life to its fullest and to make each day the best day of your life. And I think he was fascinating how he talked about that, some of those things. He had he has several ways of trying to implement that in his everyday lifestyle. So we can talk a little bit more about that. But to me, and what was the most impressive is someone with that much power and that much control, still being humble, still being trying to live the best life he could live. And one of his things was that he focused on death. I think he called it, let me see here, he called it memento mori, remember that you will die. And I think that was a term that they tried to share with, even like if generals were coming back from war and they would be paraded through a city, they would often have a slave next to him whispering this into his ear, so the general would not get too enamored with his own fame and his own victory and think that he is the greatest. So this concept of memento mori and focusing on your death seemed weird to me. Why would you want to focus on your death? But I think the way it's described is that we're all going to die. We forget that. We sometimes live in a bubble, like we're not paying attention that this is going to inevitably happen to us all. And that death is just as important as birth. Can we die well? And I think that makes you think, because whatever you accomplish here on earth, are not permanent. So it'll make you think a little bit bigger than some of the small stuff we do here on the planet. And not to waste precious times, waste time on things that are not essential, because, what would you end up saying on your deathbed? That you really regretted not getting to do. So I think this concept he tried to promote and practice was a way to live every day as if you may not have another. And
Yeah.
that was seemed very powerful as an emotional intelligence tool for himself, maybe what helped him to be a great leader. And Brett, like you said today, here we are discussing his works because of it.
Yeah.
And him wanting not to be famous, and that wasn't his motive. It was simply to practice these actual philosophies.
That's a great point, Tom, because you know, I did a video on meditating on death. It was a Buddhist philosophy, and you know, some people may say, why do you want to, you know, meditate on death? That's ridiculous, right? But the reason is exactly what you're describing there, is meditating on death so that we can understand that we're just not here for an endless amount of time. We have a very short window of time. And there's a website that we follow, lifeexplained.com, that tells us that we only have about 25,000 hours here on earth to get the job done. Now, for those people that don't believe in reincarnation, you know, they may think, oh, I'm just here for 1 minute and then I'm out. That's fine. But then there's also the philosophy for those that do believe in reincarnation, that we only have 25,000 hours and we have to get done what we have to get done. Otherwise, we're gonna have to come back and do it again. We're gonna have to come back and do the tests again. So try to get as much done here as you possibly can, so you don't have to repeat these tests. And you can actually elevate yourself to the next level. But I think even if, let's just say, people don't believe in reincarnation, I think it's still on a moral basis, right? Let's just say you don't believe in reincarnation, but you're a good person, right? You just want to do good. It's still a call to action, knowing that you're not here forever. You're gonna die. So you might as well make the best of every single day while you're here, because you don't know how long you really have, right? So either way, the Buddhist philosophy really talk about that. So I'm glad that Marcus had the same intention about it. Was, man, I got to get to work. I only have a certain amount of time and I got things to do. So I got to move my tuchus, you know? So guys, I want to pose another question to you. So what do you think that the leaders of today could learn from Marcus? You know, Tom, why don't you start us off on that? So what can the leaders of today learn from Marcus?
Well, I think, one, to be humble, you know, and to do what is in whatever in their minds the highest and best good, you know, on the planet. It's like it's this concept of not what can the planet do for me, but what can I do for the planet and or the people and our community, and whatever level we apply that phrase, you know, that's famous John F. Kennedy phrase, where that's not what what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. We can spin that into various you know, things. And that, I think, that if we can bring that awareness, it's not that we should be afraid of death, but we should be afraid of not living our fullest lives. And I think Marcus Aurelius, from what I've read and saw and looked at about him, was what he was trying to live up to. You know, it was a hard time. You know, you think about the Roman period, they probably lived only to, lucky if they lived to 30 or 40 years old. You know, it seemed like they had various illnesses. You know, you wouldn't think a culture that ancient would have so many health issues and die so young. So I imagine it conquering other countries, maybe going into other battles and being exposed to other people. Who knows? I'm not sure what happened there, but they really had to face death early on in their life. We kind of live in a world now where we think, oh, we get to be 80 or 90, and you know, we all imagine that anyways, when, you know, no one's guaranteed it, but we kind of live in a little bubble thinking we can get away with that. But maybe they had more urgency back then. I don't know. But that to me is, you know, let's focus on, you know, living life and not being afraid of death, and doing the things that we would, you know, let's not lose out on what we would do. I think one thing I'll end it with here is that I heard this phrase that, you know, you usually don't regret the things you've done when you look at regret it's usually you regret the things you haven't done. So, when we do something, yes, we might have regrets. We made a mistake and we did something. Maybe we got into a relationship. It turned out maybe not what we expected, but to never have even tried to do that relationship or any other, or take a new job or live in a new place. Those are the things that maybe people, I think, might be struggling with more on their deathbed than if they actually tried it and failed.
And so in terms of with the leadership, the humble, you feel like the leaders should be more humble today. They should be more focused on what can they do to really serve the people, and how can they live better lives.
Yes, I mean that is the ultimate. See, if like, and it's human nature. I mean, maybe we'll have Brett talk about this, but it's human nature. Once you have power and control, and you have ego, to want to be acknowledged and to use, and then now how do you use that power? Do you use it for good? Do you use it for evil? Do you use it for hurting the population or helping? And it's we're all humans. I'm not judging anybody, and you're not in somebody's shoes who is a politician or a leader. It's hard, and I don't think any leader can really appeal to all the people and all the people's needs. So it's a very challenging environment. So I think having a philosophy like Marcus had is a good guidebook or a guideline to live by, even if you make the mistakes in your decisions along the way. Because at least your intention is to try to do this, to try to live the life to its fullest, to try to help in as many ways as you can, and to be of service. And so I think that would be a good lesson for all of us, if we can understand what he was attempting to do.
Yeah. What about you, Brett?
I think that's a great question about what could world leaders learn from someone like him, someone like Marcus Aurelius. And I actually was reading a bit of this today, the Meditations, and I came across one passage that talked about, he writes that, and I'm paraphrasing him, obviously, but he had this notion of taking into consideration all of the complex things that go on within each and every single one of us that leads us to be who we are. So we have so much inner complexity in terms of the way that our bodies work, the anatomy, the complexity of all the neurons that are firing in our brain, and the neurochemical processes and the hormones that guide our behaviors. And then we have a plethora of emotions, ideas. Maybe some of these things are conflicting with one another, and so there's so much complexity that's happening inside of us throughout our lives. All these complex forces that combine to make us who we are. And he said, once you actually begin to truly take the time to be in that quiet place and come to terms with all the complexities that are within you that lead you to be who you are, you can take that same understanding and you can also apply it to the world. The same way that there are so many complex biological, chemical, emotional factors that all lead to the ultimate formation of how you are and how you operate. There are so many complex economic factors, political factors, cultural factors. When you look at society, all of these interconnected connections between what people are doing with their own goals, their own intentions, how these things all combine to eventually end up it all ends up being the complexity of what society is in total. And so I think that applying that lesson right there, it could help a leader. And obviously Marcus Aurelius had so many things that leaders could learn from, but just reading that little bit today and applying that to the question you've asked, if world leaders could recognize that same complexity within themselves and how they have become their own person, and how all of those complexities lead to who they are as an individual, and recognizing that that's the way the world is as well. And if I can become more acquainted, becoming acquainted with those complexities, so that allows me to have a better understanding of how my community is functioning, how my society is functioning, how my country is functioning, and then how the world is functioning, my country in relation to other countries as well. And being able to come to terms with all of that information, it's going to allow them to have that awareness and that essentially that awareness of how the world works. And then also from that Stoic position, like you said, when you talked about the definition, knowing what you can control and what you can't control. And so being able to understand the complexity of society and say, okay, now that I understand all of the complex inner workings of what makes a culture work the way it does, what can I control as a leader and what can't I control? And going back to what you've talked about is just striving to be the best person you can be and take action and live the philosophy. Okay, this is what I can control. Let me go ahead and act. Let me do something and have the impact that I can. This is what I can't control. I can't control the fact that half the population doesn't like me. They voted for someone else. I can't necessarily make everyone happy. And that's something that I have to accept and move on with that awareness. So I think that's what comes to mind in terms of what world leaders could potentially learn from not only Marcus Aurelius, but the Stoic approach altogether.
Nice. So let me ask you guys a question. First, I'm going to pose to you a story that I just heard earlier today from a interview I saw with the Daily Wire. It's a network. I don't know if you guys know it. Tom, you know it. Brett, do you know that network?
Yeah.
Okay, the Daily Wire. And Matt Walsh was talking about this story, and they were talking about the secrets of marriage. And I think that this story is very good with what we're talking about right now. So I'm going to share the story, and then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. So the story goes like this. There was a man that was being executed, and he requested to see his wife for the last time. And they said, no problem, we'll let you spend a few hours with your wife, but you cannot tell her that you will be executed. You must keep that to yourself. That is the deal. He agreed to the deal, and he spent his very few last hours with his wife, and he listened to her. He was present with her. He, they had a beautiful time, and then he had to go, and apparently she was traveling somewhere. So she was put on a boat, on a ship to sail off somewhere. And that was the end. They never saw each other again. The question here is, was that man practicing Stoicism, a healthy dose of Stoicism, in your opinion, based on what we're reading and studying? Or would you say that that's a form of toxic masculinity? Because the world now is talking a lot about toxic masculinity. So again, the question here is, was that Stoicism a healthy dose of Stoicism, that he protected her from that pain? Or was that a form of toxic masculinity?
Here, that's a really interesting story, that's such an intense thing to have been put into. One, to you're going to die in a few hours, and now you can't tell this person that is your partner in life. I got to say that was quite the challenge. One, is this based on a true story, or is this was just a theoretical?
I think it was a true story. I think it was a true story.
Well, one of the things I saw in researching a little bit of Marcus Aurelius, he describes a couple of key things to do, and he talks about negative visualization, where he would like always, because he was always dealing with confronting situations as an emperor, as a world leader. And so he said one thing to do was, and I thought this was weird, why would you want to visualize negative things? Don't you want to visualize things going well? That's all this positive mindset and everything. But he described it as like managing the worst case, preparing to manage the worst case scenarios, mentally preparing for challenges. So avoiding being overwhelmed by negative emotions because you're not prepared for them. So that Stoicism, is about creating that readiness. Another thing that he talked about was voluntary hardship. Like if you deliberately expose yourself to challenges, that will build resiliency in you. You'll become stronger. It will help you to overcome more adversity. So in this story, I gotta say, this guy was practicing some extreme form of stoicism, because, you know, how could you hold that in and not be able to tell your partner, I'm never going to see you again, goodbye, not even, you know. And it just seemed very like that practice almost to the extreme. It's a pretty extreme scenario, would be my take on it.
Now, I do want to mention, before Brett, you answer this, is that I do believe that he was not allowed to tell her. That's
What were
why.
they going to do? What were they going to do to him? Kill him?
Yeah.
I mean, he was, right? What was the
You tell, we're
consequence?
gonna kill you.
I think they
Yeah,
were gonna.
if you tell her, you're done.
No,
you
I think
know?
the punishment was on her. So if
Oh, you mean they would have
That's what I
punished
was-
her?
I think that was the punishment. I don't remember the whole
Oh.
story, but I think the punishment was, we will let you see her, but if you tell her, we will kill her. So,
Oh, okay. Okay.
yeah.
I thought it was a punishment to him, and I thought, you know, that's, you know, I don't know. All right. So I'm sorry, I got that wrong. He's still, yeah, okay, he's protecting someone else's life. So still very stoic. You know, he was meeting a very adverse challenge, and he held the higher ground, and he protected her from that consequence. So I think that's when somebody's really giving, you know, they're giving of themselves. They're not looking to take something, they're looking to, you know, he was, you know, had a final connection with this partner, and then he could, you know, stand up. He's really standing up for her. So it's another example of like, what is the highest and best thing he could have done. And so I, you know, that would be the take on it.
Nice.
Yeah, I think the same thing as well. I think that story is an example of more stoicism, because ultimately it gets down to those things of what can you control and what can't you control. And, you know, piggyback off of what Tom was saying, there's another Stoic philosopher named Seneca. And Seneca also had that position of how Tom was saying, you know, picturing things for the worse, you know, and like, well, why would you want to do that? And Seneca's logic was, if you imagine, like, if you have something planned or you expect something to happen, imagining the worst is the wiser thing to do, because when you get your hopes up and you think, you know, if let's say you're planning a beach day with all your friends or something, and if you just imagine, oh, it's going to be wonderful and beautiful and lots of sunshine and lots of fun, and then you get to the beach and it's pouring rain by the time you get there, which can happen here in South Florida for sure, you're going to be let down because your expectations were ruined. You know, what life ultimately brought to you was different than what you had planned. Whereas in Seneca's logic, if you imagine, you know, we're going to make plans for the beach just to have something to do, I guess, but we all expect it to rain. We're not going to be too shocked when we get there. We'll take the drive to take the drive, if anything, but it's probably going to rain this weekend. And then you get there and it rains, you're like, this is what I expected. And the blow is less than if you're planning for that sunny day. On the other hand, let's actually say that you were planning for that rain and then you get there and it's a beautiful day. That's that pleasant surprise. That's that, wow, oh my gosh, I'm so happy it's not raining, it's beautiful. Now we don't have to just drive back home. We can actually go out to the beach now and you can have fun. Whereas if you were just expecting it to be sunshine and rainbows and a nice day and you get there, it's like, oh, this is what I expect. So essentially the way that Seneca thought of it, and I assume Marcus Aurelius in that same Stoic, you know, camp would agree, is that by expecting the worst, it's not because you're a gloomy, doomy individual. It's just because you're more acquainted with this is life a lot of the time. A lot of time, life does not do what we expect it to do. It doesn't carry out the way we expect it to carry out. And so by being prepared for the worst, we actually, from an emotional perspective, are putting ourselves in a position where we're going to have less of an emotional blow and we're more emotionally steady to where we're like, this is what's going to happen and we're ready for it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really great. You guys are bringing up such great points, because it's true. You know, sometimes I've had that in my life where I was very much a realist. And, people will say to me, why are you so doom and gloom? Why are you so grumpy? Why are you so negative? And it was never negative. It was just always being proactive about the worst case scenario, because I don't want to be, I, exactly what we're
Let
saying here.
down.
I don't want to be disappointed. I don't want to, I don't want to be like I didn't plan for this situation to happen. And now what? So I've always been like that type of person that has always kind of like looked for the worst, for the monster in the room, so that I can prepare for the monster. And then also, I was always pleasantly surprised, which is awesome. But I do believe that there is a fine line and there is a balance. I've gotten now where I'm learning to have a balance of both. I look for the monster, but I also create a visualization for myself where I'm gonna create the best possible scenario. But if it doesn't go that way, it's okay, And so I think it's a very healthy and proactive thing to do, to create both, and that way we're always in that realist mode. And the other thing I think is a very important tool is not to get overly excited and then not to get overly upset. So for example, like, let's say we get great news, right? Phone rings, you get some great news, and it's like, oh my God, amazing. And then now you're like jumping up and down and whatever. You can get a phone call in 2 seconds, and now it's bad news about something. So it's like, the ups and downs, And so I've learned to really just keep it steady, just to keep it pretty even keel. Like, oh, I got some great news. Oh, that's awesome. Great. That's amazing. Or bad news. Oh, that sucks. But you know what? It is what it is. That's life. So, but it keeps like that even, you know what I mean? So it's great. So let's continue this conversation about this toxic masculinity that we have been hearing so much about in pop culture today. First, I want to hear from you guys. You guys are both men. And I want to hear from you. What do you think what is that? What is real toxic masculinity in your opinion? So Brett, why don't you start us off on this topic?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I'm not really much of an expert in that area. I haven't really read too much of toxic masculinity, so I'll just preface it by saying that
Yeah,
it's just my humble opinion on what
of
I
course. Yes.
mean, I'm sure that like a toxic masculinity could exist in the sense that like there's the philosopher Aristotle has a quote which says that any virtue taken to an extreme can become a vice. So like, maybe like dieting is a good thing to do, but if you haven't had a cookie in decades, then maybe you should just go have a cookie, or, maybe you exercise all the time and that's great, but maybe you haven't seen your family in weeks because you're always at the gym. Make some time for your family, so there can be good things that you can take to extremes and it ultimately ruins that good thing. And I mean, I think that I think that there's many great things about masculinity. I think that masculinity and femininity play their valuable roles in our lives and in our society. And I think that, men, what they bring in their masculinity can in many situations be a great thing that is great, not just for themselves, but also for the groups of men that they belong to, and then the families that they produce in the process of their own life. So, I mean, I do think I sometimes I will hear people say like, this is toxic masculinity and that's toxic masculinity. Sometimes I agree where it's like, yeah, sure. Like, if you took this notion that like, I'm a man, so I can never show emotion, I think that's an extreme where it's like, sure, maybe there are certain places where you don't want to show too much emotion, some places where it may be more appropriate to show emotion. But we are emotional creatures. We have parts of our brains that are for processing emotion. And so, it's I think that what you talk about is something that I believe in is balance. Like you mentioned before, having that balance. I'm a big believer in balance. So I mean, can you sometimes be too emotional and too like, oh, I'm so in my emotions, and it's extreme, and that's taken to an extreme. Sure. Can you sometimes shut yourself emotionally, just shut yourself off, and that's too much of an extreme? Sure. And you can have that healthy balance. So in my humble opinion of toxic masculinity, I don't think that masculinity is toxic per se. And I do think that some of the talks about toxic masculinity are a bit overblown. Nevertheless, I mean, I do believe that sure, a type of toxic masculinity can exist if if men specifically, or women, take this idea of what men must be and enforce it with such rigidity and such extreme like dogmatism, to the point where it doesn't allow for a little bit of flexibility, because I think that as humans we are pretty flexible creatures to some extent.
Okay. Yeah. What do you think, Tom?
Well, this is bringing to mind the theory of the yin and yang theory in acupuncture medicine. It's based on the theory of yin and yang, which is yin is female, and yang. These are like the yin and yang theory is actually looking at the world as having these opposites that need each other to survive. We have daylight, we have nighttime. We have fire, we have water. So this, we have female, we have male. But the yin and yang theory also talks about balancing these out, that they need to stay somewhat in balance. And when they go out of balance, then we can have, problems. If it becomes too dry in an area, then the trees don't get enough water. Then that's an extreme environmental situation, and then fires can occur. So it leads to fires. But if we have a balance, if we have too much water and flooding occurs, we can have landslides. And, so the nature knows how to basically balance itself out. You need to have some room for those things to happen. But it seems like nature normally is pretty good at balancing itself out. If we try to put out forest fires and not let them burn, we're just now only putting off the inevitable, which would cause more intense fires. So as an example of something. So now you see the concept of where they plan burns to make sure that they don't put out all those small fires, allow nature to do what it's supposed to do. But on a female male point of view, and a physiology of our body, if we get too out of balance with yin and yang, it can lead to what we call fire and excess energy or toxic energy. And that would be reflected in health issues, or now in emotional issues, or how we project ourselves. So, not to get too off target, I don't really know a whole lot about the concept of toxic masculinity either. It just sounds like someone's either bullying or using their position as a male to be aggressive and hurtful. I don't know. That's just what I'm assuming from the sounds of the word toxic masculinity. But I think that anybody can be toxic with their position. And this is just focusing on, I guess, how men project themselves in the world. So I think, yeah, it just doesn't sound like, it sounds like one of these things we'd have to look at ourselves and not be that way, or try to catch ourselves when we are acting that way. Or if a culture promotes that, can they over time, find a way to overcome that and find a better balance for how people, coexist.
Yeah.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Okay, great.
I took us off tangent.
Say again?
I'm not sure if I took us off tangent, but
no, it's all good. It's all good.
This concept of toxic masculinity.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you, as a woman, right? As a woman, I'm going to tell you my perspective on toxic masculinity and kind of like what's going on in the world today, where a lot of conversations are, we need to feminize, right? We need to more feminize the men, right? They need to be more sensitive. They need to be more, they need to not be toxic masculinity, right? And so what's happening from there's two parts here. So the first part is, as a female, women want men that are strong, that are protectors, that are going to, if I'm in a dark alley, I don't want to be with a man who's just gonna break down and start crying. Okay, you can start crying if you want, Tom, but you better take care of business. Okay.
Wait, is there someone like a thief in the dark alley, or are y'all just in a dark alley hanging out?
No, we're in a dark alley and we're walking through there, and God forbid something starts to go awry, Tom better handle business, and and I'll probably help because I'm quite the fighter myself. But
you mean hiding behind you is not the concept
exactly.
of
Exactly. You better not. So
take my wife, please.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's what women want. We want a strong assertive man. Now, where do we get off the balance, right? The balance goes where what Tom just said about being a bully, using aggression, taking that position where you are bigger and stronger than, let's say, your female counterpart, and now you use that to get your way or to control or to abuse or all those kinds of things. That is what true male toxicity or toxic masculinity means to me. And I'm pretty sure that if you ask any rational individual, they will probably tell you the same thing. Now, with that, I do believe that there is that fine line where, men and women, because there could be toxic feminism, right? So there could be a woman who is overly aggressive and be, very angry and very narcissistic and very abusive. So it could happen from there too, And so I think anytime where you're taking these two polar extremes, right, and you're going off of these two extremes, and people are just hurting one another, I think that's where we're running into trouble, So regardless of male or female, if both are using their strength and their power to abuse and hurt one another, that's definitely not a healthy balance at all. And then the other thing is that with how Tom was saying with yin and yang and Chinese medicine, I follow the philosophy of nature as well, is that we need both of these energies, male and female. We need both of these to align and to, create miracles in the world. I could never do the things that I do now without Tom's energy, as a male, and vice versa. As me as a female, he benefits from my energy. And so, this breakdown of these essential energies, the male and the female, is really, really a big, it's a big thorn, I would say, in our society, because it's really hurting the big picture. But, we won't go on a tangent with that, but just to say that these two energies are vital, in my opinion. So I'm glad that
can I ask, did this come out of like looking at some of Marcus Aurelius's work, or is this just this concept of toxic masculinity? Is this out of looking at Marcus Aurelius's work, or anything that relates to? Did you pick up anything from Marcus Aurelius about the issue?
No,
of toxic?
it's just a connection. It's just a connection to see, because some may say, oh, but they were so male, male toxicity back then, they were so, because Stoicism, right? Stoicism can be seen as maybe a little bit of that toxic masculinity, because when you're Stoic, you're, right? You're strong, you're silent type, you're very like, stern maybe. So there could be seen as, oh, they were very toxic back then. That's toxic masculinity. And that's not the case at all. They were very strong and powerful, and they knew how to intuitively when to stand up and when not to stand up. And that's why he was such a great leader, right? So
Yeah, but so it sounds like, if I could just interject here, Marcus Aurelius really became well known and appreciated by the people because he stood. I think he didn't act like a toxic masculine man.
right,
That he did not do some of the things that other emperors have done, as Brett was describing, like Caligulus and some of the others that were really horrible. More Stoicism, I think, was more about, personal development and personal ethics, and having like that ability to work on self-improvement. So I think it's almost describing Stoicism instead of looking like the word Stoicism might sound like, yeah, you're going to be hard and cold. But when I'm looking into it, I feel I get a whole different look at it. It's more about self-improvement and awareness and personal ethics. Like, what's the best I could be?
right.
So as a person.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. Actually, that's our last section here, is that I want to ask you guys this last question. Is that so, how do we balance now? How do we balance this, stoicism? I know I'm probably saying it wrong. It's fine. How do we balance this stoicism? I'm still not saying.
Stoicism. It's okay.
What Tom
Stoicism.
said. How do we do that in our world today? Right. So I want to leave the viewers with that. How do we do that, guys? How do we now teach, if somebody says on the other side, now someone's watching this and says, okay, so what do I do? What do I do now to become more stoic with a balance of not toxic masculinity, but, or a toxic female, right? Because it applies for, like I said, to both. How do I balance this? And how do I, use this now to manage my crazy, to recognize and manage my level of crazy? How do I create this balance? So, what tips do you guys have? Just throw them out there. If Tom, you want to start?
Sure. I think it goes back to what Brett brought up, was that, the stoicism to me now is like, pay attention to what you can't change and what you can change, and become aware. There's only certain things. There are certain things that are limits. You can't change certain things. So you have to be realistic about it. And then it's like the pause, what a pleasure concept, like it's about how do we respond, right, to situations, all these challenges we're up against. We're always going to have new challenges. As much as we conquer the one challenge, there's going to be the next challenge. We conquer that challenge, there's a next challenge. As you get older, you start to see these things are just part of the cycle of living a human life on this planet. So the key there is, and all we can control is how we respond, right? So I think that's ultimately what I would leave this with. The feeling I get from this is very powerful. If we can really get and kind of embody this essence, it might bring us a little more peace, because we might have less reactivity, this emotional reactivity to like just go, oh my God, it's, react and, scared and fear. And then, we're constantly reacting and not spending the time to really prepare ourselves and look at how would we serve ourselves to respond in ways that now that we're prepared, we can be better, we can respond better and be not so emotionally reactive, would be the way I would leave it.
Nice. What about you, Brett?
Yeah, I guess like the first thing I could say is look to men like Marcus Aurelius and maybe someone like Seneca as examples in how they live their lives as well, to avoid going into that extreme of like a toxic masculinity. Being able to, like, whether it's through reading their works or watching, there's a YouTube channel called I think it's the Daily Stoic. I might be getting it wrong, but there's like a really great stoicism YouTube channel where this guy does a really great job of breaking down the ideas of stoicism. So you can watch content like that to get a good idea of how you could incorporate it into your life in a meaningful way and in a beneficial way. And then, in terms of avoiding that, the toxic side of things, just being aware of, if you are feeling some kind of way, then being able to just pull yourself in with that balance and say, all right, this is the stuff I can control, the stuff I can't control. How do I act accordingly in this situation? So, as a man, it's not like, you're not going to have a emotional response to something, but knowing in a certain situation when it's time to express that emotion and when it's time to put that emotion, comprehend it, experience it, but say, okay, I'm feeling this, but it's time to act. It's time to get something done. It's time to solve the problem, not just sit here and be like, oh, this happened to me. Oh no, like, and getting deeply emotional. There's a time for that, maybe to like okay, this is what I feel, but we live in a world where you also have to say, okay, that's what I feel. This is what I got to do, and you act accordingly. So I think that's probably how you could implement that stoicism into your life, to where you are able to realize what I can control, what I can't control, and then how do I act accordingly, and just try to improve myself in the process of all of that as well.
Yeah. And yeah, everything you guys said was amazing. And did you guys know the Serenity Prayer?
Yeah.
So I don't know it completely. I don't want to botch it up. And I'll put it in the comments below, but it basically just says something like, God give me the strength to control the things I can, and the things that I can't, just give me the strength or the vision to see the difference, right? To be able to discern what can I control and what I cannot control, and then act accordingly. And so that's a very, very powerful prayer. The other thing I want to mention is, for me, I think that the best technique for this is to practice creating win-wins, always focusing on creating win-wins for everyone involved. And frankly, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. And when you make those mistakes, just clean it up, own up to it. Look, I screwed up. I said some dumb things. I reacted. I'm sorry. What can I do to fix it? Just clean it up, because the truth is that we're humans and we're going to screw up a lot. So for me, that's pretty much one of my biggest tools, is that I can just clean things up, because I often make mistakes. And so, we're pretty much at the end there. I think, Tom, you had a couple of tips on this topic. Did you want to share those, or we can always just post them in the comments?
Well, no, I think we kind of touched on a lot of them. I think, yeah, I think we did a good job. I mean, he talks about how to make. What I focused on is he had 6 ways to make each day the best day of our lives. He kind of this area I found it was. I think we touched on so many of them, so much of them. It was practices of daily awareness and consciousness. To avoid procrastination, to visualize how to deal with challenges, to be willing to confront hardships, instead of so much in our modern day times we want to run from them and hide and not deal with things. So and so just all these actions, reviewing your day and making sure, looking at what you did, and then like becoming aware that hey, life is going to end at some point. And when you're at that point on your deathbed, what are you going to visualize? What are you going to be, what are your last thoughts going to be about? And hopefully, if you live the Stoicism philosophy seems to be trying to guide us, or from my interpretation, into making these choices now. So when we're actually at that moment in life, we'll have felt maybe more like we've done the best we could. Maybe we're obviously human, we're going to regret things, but we'll at least, done it with consciousness and given it our best efforts, because we have this awareness.
Nice. Any final thoughts, Brett?
Not really. I mean, I guess I would say that it's been a pleasure speaking with both of you. It was a pleasure meeting you from the get-go. It was a really interesting conversation about, Marcus Aurelius and, just Stoicism in general, and, the benefit it can have to our lives when we apply it, and, coupling that with things like emotional intelligence, and it's definitely an interesting discussion to have, and I'm sure people who listen to something like this or similar content can gain a lot from it.
Awesome. Well, my final thought here is, guys, for everyone listening and for us here, just to really work on staying in gratitude. Gratitude is probably one of the most important and hardest places to stay. When you're living in this human existence, it's definitely every day, if you can try to at least inject a couple of moments of gratitude into your day, I swear to God, it's magical. And I wish for all of us to have that peace and to just enjoy our everyday and being in the moment, because that's really all we got. All we got is right here, right now. And so I want to thank you both for being a part of this conversation. And thank you so much for your insight and taking some time to really, study this subject on Marcus Aurelius. He's an amazing man. And I think if more of us can, follow these kinds of models, we would have a very powerful world for all of us to enjoy. So again, thank you all very much. And till the next time, as always, when you know and understand yourself, the world will know and understand you too. And remember, what's the best that can happen? Okay, guys, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you soon.